Hi everyone and welcome along to the Spring Wreath tutorial. Thank you so much for ordering your kits. I'm delighted to have you with me so I can show you how to put them together. I am so excited for this spring and this wreath. We've included some of the most beautiful seasonal spring foliages and florals and bulbs that you can then plant in the garden for next year. So yeah, I'm really excited to show you how it looks, how to put it together, so that you can pop it on your door and welcome people to your home for this spring season. Okay, let's begin. So I'm going to show you all the things that will come in your beautiful box. We have your wreath ring, which is this copper wreath ring here. We will have all of your foliages, so you'll have some pistache, some olive, some ruscus, some Ralphie, some asparagus fern. You will have some beautiful fresh rosemary. You will have some lovely florals, including limonium, blue thistle, this sort of lemony, soft yellow craspedia, some wax flower that smells of lemongrass. It's beautiful. And you'll have two pots of bulbs. So you have your blue muscari and your white muscari. And I'll show you how to add them to your wreath so that then after the spring season's over, you can put them in your garden, and I'll go through all of that with you in a second. And then you will have your sphagnum moss, which we use to kind of provide that water source to your florals and foliages. You will have your skewers and your binding wire. So all you need is, and your twine, which is here, which I'm bound to lose, I always do. I'm going to put this somewhere safe, I'm going to put that there. And your binding wire. So all you need is some secateurs or some really sharp scissors, and everything else is included in your kit. Okay, so first of all, we're going to take our wreath ring and we're going to bind it with our binding wire. So you attach your binding wire to your wreath ring. Just fold the end of your binding wire around one of the sort of sections of your copper wreath ring, just to attach it. And then simply, oh, mine's stuck there. That's a good start. Let me start again. I've gone on the wrong end. Okay, now it's going to work. So I'm binding my wreath with my binding wire, and then you simply need to go over and around, so over and under, just creating sort of a zigzag pattern. And the pure reason for this, it doesn't need to look pretty, it doesn't need to look neat. The reason for this is so that we can put our sphagnum moss on top and it won't fall through. So just an up and over and then under, up and over and under. And then when you've got all the way around, don't take your binding wire off, leave it on and just leave it to the side. So now you can take your bag of sphagnum moss. So this is fresh sphagnum moss. You don't really see it on your wreath. It's purely, as I said, just to provide those sort of damp, sort of water source almost, and to keep your wreath as fresh for as long as possible. So I'm just going to tip some out. And then start adding it to my wreath. So you're going to take a handful and lay it on top where your binding wire is attached, like so. It doesn't matter if you've got the browner bits, you honestly won't see it. And then I'm just going to carry on doing that motion with my binding wire, putting it up and over. And then the next section, up and over. And yeah, it doesn't matter if you've got bits that are sort of a little bit more soily, or bits that are green. All of it can be used. So use all of it on your wreath. Therapeutic, repetitive kind of part of the wreath making process. Quite enjoy this bit. So in each stage, we're keeping our binding wire attached to our wreath, so we're not cutting it off, unless you make the error that I did at the beginning where I found the wrong bit on. Okay, nearly finished. Okay, I'm just going to put that to the side, keep my binding wire attached. I'm just going to put that to the side, quick tidy up. Okay, and now we're going to go through all of our foliages and florals and cut them down. Excuse me, and then we're going to put them in a pile, all in their own sort of varieties, so we know where we are, and all the sort of ends can just go in the bin or on the floor, which is what will happen in my case, and then we know where we stand and what we've got beautifully laid out in front of us. Okay, so I'm going to start with the pistache. Now this is a really good sort of what I would call a filler foliage. So on its own, it's not particularly necessarily anything special, but it provides a really good sort of contrast and depth to your wreath and adds that body. So you're cutting it into sections like this. So I'd say 5 or 6 inches, just sections like this. And popping that into your pile and then putting the sort of stem just away, because we're not going to be using that, of course. If you have any smaller bits on your stem, that doesn't matter, include those. This is a lovely kind of Mediterranean kind of smell, I think. A lot of these foliages are scented, so that just adds to that lovely kind of spring seasonal feel. And hopefully you'll be able to smell them when you walk in your front door. Okay, so we're nearly finished cutting down the pistache. We're finally there. So that's our pile of pistache foliage, and I'm just going to put that to one side all together and move on to the next thing. So the next thing we'll do is called the Wreath. So it's a Pistasporum, and it's this kind of lovely, more of a sagey green. It's got sort of like a penny-shaped leaf. One side is more of a kind of sage green, and the other side is more of a kind of silvery colour. So it adds a lovely contrast to this more fresh green of the pistache. So we're just going to cut that down in a similar way. You can keep this a bit longer if you want to. So you're just looking at sections like that and pop that in your pile. We're not going to waste any of it though, so if any of the sections are shorter, that doesn't matter. We're still going to include them in our wreath. Any bits that don't look particularly sort of aesthetically pleasing will go behind the wreath, just adding that kind of body to it and that depth to it that you won't necessarily see sort of how it's cut, maybe a bit more, you know, slightly less attractive way, I suppose, if you compare it to, say, you know, something like that, but we will keep that anyway. And that will form the back of our wreath. probably the most time consuming bit, is breaking it all down. So that's my Pittosporum Ralphii. So that will also go into a pile to the side. I'm now going to cut down the olive. So you get a whole bunch of olive in your kits. Again, it just adds that sort of difference in texture with the other foliages. So with the olive, you can again go a bit longer. So for example, on something like this, I would cut a longer bit here. So you've got something like that. And then I would cut off the main stem. So you're taking the sort of side shoots off of the main stem, popping those in a pile. And as I say, you can keep some of the sections a bit longer. That sort of results in a more rustic, wild looking wreath. So it depends how you want it to look. If you want it to look really compact, you can cut the foliages a little bit shorter, not much shorter, because it's better to have them longer, because you can then trim them down at the end. And try and cut just above a leaf node when you are cutting. So you've got your 2 leaves here coming off the main stem. You want to cut just above, because then you have a neat end on the other sort of section of your stem, and you have your sort of main sort of body is looking neat as well, if that makes sense. I'll show you again just to kind of explain what I mean. So if you have a really long stem like this, I would cut it just here, so just above 2 leaves. So we have one section there, and then we have another section here. And both have got a nice, neat sort of cut. So again, we're going to try not to waste any of the foliages. You know, unless it's sort of really not usable, I wouldn't necessarily use this bit. But we'll try and use as much as we can. Okay, nearly there on the olive. Perfect. So let's pop that to the side. So that is our bundle of cut olive. And now we'll move on to the, oh, I've got another bit there. Let me just cut it down. Move on to the ruscus. So this is called soft ruscus. And it's sort of, excuse me, quite a rustic looking foliage, really kind of deep glossy leaves, quite Italian in my opinion, in how it looks, just adds a lovely sort of dimension to your wreath. So we're going to cut that down into sections again. So again, my advice would be to be cutting it just above where you've got another leaf growing. So we're breaking these stems down. They're really long stems, so we can use lots of it in lots of little sections. So just cutting above. Another sort of offshoot. that is our ruscus cut down. And again, we'll pop that in a pile. And now it's just our asparagus fern. Sorry. Now the asparagus fern just adds a sort of soft, whispery kind of feel to the wreath. Do be careful because there are sort of thorns on the stem. They're not going to harm you or anything. They just might sort of just catch you off guard a little bit. But they're not sort of like a rose thorn. They're just sort of a little kind of nodule there. So just be careful. With the asparagus fern, this is just going to be in little touches along the wreath, around the wreath, sorry. So we don't need loads of it. So we're kind of just going to cut little sections. And again, they don't need to look beautiful because these are going to go amongst all the other foliages and just add that sort of touch of delicate, sort of whispery foliage. So again, you're kind of looking at probably a length of about 5 or 6 inches. Okay, so that's our asparagus fern cut down and popped to the side. So let's move on to the rosemary. Now this obviously smells amazing. It is very different to you know, a pot of rosemary that you would buy in a supermarket. It's very well, this one actually has these beautiful kind of purple flowers on it actually, but it's very rustic in look. You know, it's not sort of you know, perfectly shaped glossy green rosemary. I prefer it personally. It just adds a really lovely depth to your wreath. And you're just going to cut this into sections, about 6-inch sections. And again, with this, it's not going to be all over our wreath. This is just to add nice touches of a beautifully scented foliage. So I've only got probably 6 sections of rosemary. We'll use that at the back. Okay, so let's pop our rosemary to the side as well. Okay, let's go now with the lilac limonium. Now this is a beautiful, really long lasting floral. It dries out perfectly. So you might get a stem with lots and lots of offshoots. So we're just going to cut the offshoots off the main stem into sections that look like that. So you're looking again sort of 5-6 inches in length. And pop those to the side. We're not going to waste any of it again, so if you've got sort of shorter lengths like this, I would still sort of cut it off the main stem and it's still perfectly usable. When you get to the top of your stem, you can have it a little bit shorter and then you can still use the sort of 2 offshoots from the main stem. Nearly there. This is definitely the more labour intensive part of the wreath making, is getting everything cut down and into piles. Okay, so that's our limonium. And now we will do our wax. So again, just sort of little touches of this. So really long lasting sort of floral foliage, I suppose. It's not really like your normal floral, but we're just going to cut this down into sections. I'm going to keep that anyway, just the end, just because it adds a little bit of a different texture. And what you might be able to smell when you cut it is sort of a lemongrass scent. Don't know why. I probably should look into why that is, but it smells amazing. Okay, so that's our wax flower. And then we'll move on to our thistle. So you'll have 2 stems of the blue thistle. And we're going to cut off the individual sort of, I suppose they're not really flowers, are they? But they're more kind of seed heads. We'll take those off. So you'll find a sort of probably a lower down middle thistle. So if you take off the 2 either side, and then you can keep that middle one nice and long as well. Okay, and that goes in our pile, and then we're nearly there. Then we've got the yellow craspedia. They're also called billy bobs. They just add a lovely kind of spring tone to the wreath. So we're just going to cut those down into, you know, like a 7-inch piece, because we can have those sort of higher up and further out around on the wreath if we want to. Okay, so that's those done. With regards to the mascara, we will sort those out at the end because they go in afterwards. Okay, I think we can begin. So let's take our wreath with our moss on top. And what we're going to do, in a nutshell, is create little posies of all of your ingredients in your hand and then attach them and bind them to our wreath. So I personally start, I go in a sort of clockwise motion. So the main sort of biggest florist tip that I can give you to create a really professional looking wreath is to work in the same direction. So each time the sort of the top of your posy is facing the same way. So you're working in a really kind of uniform motion, and that is what makes a professional looking wreath. It might not make sense now, but I'll go through it and take you step by step. So we're going to take sections of our foliages in our hand and make a kind of posy. Now it doesn't need to be, you know, professionally technically done, doesn't need to be spiraled or anything like that. Just hold it in your hand and just start adding in your foliages. The prettier foliages, or the ones that you like the best, should go at the front. If you've got some pieces of foliage that you've maybe cut wrong, or you don't like the look of, they go at the back. So anything you want to kind of take center stage goes at the front. Let's get some asparagus fern. That will go on the top for me because I love how it looks. And then we can start adding in the more colourful things. So I'm going to add in one sort of stem of the limonium. I'm going to pop in one of the thistles, and I'm going to put in one of the billy bob, but I'm going to let that sit a little bit higher. I'm going to put in a little bit actually more of the pistache just there. Okay, I work in a, like I say, in a clockwise motion. I'm right-handed, so my personal preference is to lay my posies down on the left-hand side of my wreath. You might want to go anti-clockwise, and so you would go on your right side of your wreath. So your sort of posies will all face anti-clockwise. For me, I go in a clockwise way, so my posies all face clockwise. It will make a little bit more sense as we go along. Okay, where I have my binding wire, I'm going to place my posy slightly, sort of, I'll start at facing 12 o'clock. Okay, so you've got your ring sat in front of you, your binding wire, and it's going to face 12 o'clock. I'm then going to slightly tilt it to face 11 o'clock. So it's slightly facing the outside of the wreath at a slight angle. I'm then going to hold it firmly in my hand with my wreath. I'm going to bind the stems probably 2 or 3 times with my binding wire. I'll then lay that back down. I will then twist, because now I am working in the position that the previous posy stems are. So I'm going to cover those binded stems with a new posy, and they're all going to face the same direction. So this will make sense, I think, when I add a next one. So let's make our posy with little sections of our foliages. Now, being aware that you probably wouldn't put rosemary in every single posy, but maybe in every other one. Okay, I'm not going to put asparagus fern in this one either. I'm going to put some more limonium. And then, where's the thistle? The thistle's in that one. I'm going to pop some waxflower in this one. Again, you're not popping waxflower in every single one. It's just touches, because then we're going to add in the bulbs. At the end, we want them to kind of take a good center stage. So I'm just going to trim this down a little bit. I'm then going to place this new posy on top of the binding wire of my previous posy at 12 o'clock, and then I'm going to slightly angle it out to 11 o'clock. I'm going to take it in my hand, really nice and firm. You can be really assertive with it. Nothing's going to break. And then I'm going to bind it round 3 times. I'm going to pop it back down, and then I'm going to twist. So again, my wire that I can see is sort of at 9 o'clock, so that my next posy is going to sit on top and face 12 o'clock. So let's do another posy. Taking my pistache, and then my ruscus, some olive, which I'm going to put back. I might put another one at the front just to add some contrast. I'm going to add in some rosemary now on top, because I love it, and then I'll put a little bit of Ralphie on top. So I've got my lovely sort of foliage posy here, looking nice and full. I'm then going to add in my purple limonium, and on this one I'm going to add in my thistle on top, and then I'm going to put in a little yellow billy bob or crospedia. Okay, so then this is going to go on top of the previous posies wires. So I'm going to put it at 12 o'clock, and then I'm going to tilt it to 11 o'clock. And then I'm going to bind those stems to my wreath base. I'm going to lay it back down, and then I'm going to twist it. So now I have my wires at sort of 9 o'clock on a clock. If you were doing it the opposite way, if you are, say, left-handed, I would be doing it, or the binding wires would be at 3 o'clock. So mine, because I'm going in this motion, in a clockwise motion, are at 9 o'clock. Okay, let's make another posy. So I'm going to take some pistache and some ruscus. That's a lovely piece of ruscus. I'm going to put that on top. I'm going to put some olive. That's going to go at the back, because that's not a beautifully cut piece. If I had a knife, that's a lovely piece. I'm going to put that on the front. Maybe a bit more pistache at the back. I'm going to pop in some Ralphie on top, and some asparagus fern, but I might actually put that in once I put all of my other sort of florally bits, like the limonium. So I'll put the limonium on. And then the wax flower. And then the asparagus fern is going to go on top. Okay. And then I'm just going to place that on top of the previous posies wires facing 12. And then I'm going to tilt it slightly to 11, hold it down, and then bind that round, bind it over and under. Pop it down and then twist. Okay. Start adding in our foliages. That's a nice piece of ruscus. I'm going to put that at the back because that will kind of spray out to make it look nice and rustic and sort of informal, which is how I like my wreaths to look. On the previous posy I didn't include rosemary, so I'm going to for this one. Put that on top, adding in my limonium, and then I'm going to add in my thistle. I'm going to miss my Craspedia for this one. I'm going to put it in the next one. And then this will probably be where I will make sure I've got a nice sort of blue mascari bulb here. Okay, so laying it down on top of the binding wire, facing 11 o'clock, bind it nice and tight, lay it down, and then twist. And it's starting to take shape. Okay. You're probably looking at creating, I would say, usually about 11 sections on a 12-inch wreath ring. So it's a case of making sure that we've got enough foliage to last for 12, which you most definitely do. I think you might have some left over. But yeah, just making sure you're kind of evenly spreading it throughout those 12 posies. Okay, so how does thistle? I'm going to put some wax flower on this one, along with the purple limonium. We had a thistle in the last one. I'm going to pop one of my yellow billy bobs. Okay, so I'm laying it down on top of the previous posies binding wire, and I'm tilting it slightly to 11 o'clock, and then I'm tightly binding that round 3 times. I'm laying it down, and then I'm going to twist. Okay, it's definitely taking shape now. So adding in your pistache. So I'm probably looking that I've probably got about 4 more posies left. So at this point, if you want to, you can sort of divvy up your foliages so that you know you've got the right number of sort of pieces left. So there we go. So I've got 4 there. I think I'm only going to need 4. So I've got the one that I've just started. So actually I've got 5. But it's nice to have a backup just in case. Okay. So I can tell from the ruscus that I've got enough for 5 posies, or 4 or 5 posies. And I definitely have enough of the olive. So I'm going to add in a couple of bits of olive. And some lovely Ralphie on top. Did I use rosemary? No, I didn't. So I'm going to add some, or did I? I don't know. I'm going to add some rosemary on top. So I have got 1, 2, I've actually got 4 pieces of rosemary left. So I can now start using a bit more rosemary if I want to. And then I'm going to add in some asparagus fern. Some of this gorgeous purple limonium. I'm not going to use any wax flower, but I am going to add in a thistle. And then I'm going to lay that down on top my previous posies binding wire. Am I boring you yet, saying that repeatedly? And then I'm going to bind those stems 3 times. I'm going to lay that down, and then I'm going to twist. So starting another posy. adding in the rosemary, and then some olive, and some asparagus fern. And then your lemonium. And I'm going to pop in my yellow Billy Bob. I've got this one and then another one left, so they're all evenly spaced around the wreath. And I'm going to pop in a sprig of wax flower on top, and then that's going to lay on top of the binding wire of the previous posy. Need one piece of foliage at the back there. There we go. And then I'm going to bind that really nice and tight. Lay it down and then twist. Okay, it's really taking shape now and I'm already excited to get the bulbs in. Okay, so I'm probably onto my final 3 posies now. Some ruscus. I want something tall at the back, so I'm going to add that sort of wispy piece of ruscus in at the middle. And then some rosemary. And then the lemonium. And a thistle. Okay, so that's ready to go on top of my binding wire from the previous posy. So start at 12, twist to 11, and then really assertively bind those stems to the wreath ring. And then lay it down and then twist. Okay, so 2 more posies I think. Now you might be tempted to kind of throw everything in for these last 2 or 3 depending, we'll see. I would say don't, because it will then be a little bit sort of disjointed and a bit sort of, depending on how you hang it, sort of might be a bit side heavy or top heavy. So try and keep the posies in a similar size if you can. And you can always use any leftover foliage in sort of bud vases. Okay, popping in my lemonium now. And I'm going to add in my white wax flower and my, just working out, I think I'm going to put my last Billy Bob in, just so that it's nice and balanced, so you've got the 5 going throughout the wreath. And a thistle as well. Okay, and then that goes on top of your previous posies binding wires, facing out slightly, and then you're binding that up and over 3 times, although this is the 4th time actually. Okay, so we're heading to our last posy now, I think. Sometimes you might want to do a normal size posy, and then you might then add in a little posy at the end to kind of tie it off. I might do that just so that you can see how that works. So I'm just going to create another posy, same as all the other ones that we've done before. So same size as all of my previous posies. Adding in my limoneum. And my wax flower and my last thistle on top, and then some asparagus fern on top of that. Okay, so for this one I'm going to trim it down. So I'm just going to take some of the sort of chunky stems off so that it's a slightly sort of shorter posy. And I'm going to lay that on top, as with all of the other posies, on top of my binding wire, holding it nice and tight, and then wrapping it round. If you have found that this is definitely your last posy, you've got no more space for any more, then skip this one and wait for my next posy, because that way I will show you how to sort of cast off, how to end the posies in your wreath. Okay, and I'm going to twist. Okay, so this is definitely my last posy to go in. So I'm just going to gather my foliage up. Make a sort of little posy. It's not going to be too dissimilar from the previous one. I don't have any pistache left, but that's not a problem. So I'm filling in with some olive and some Ralphie. I'll pop some asparagus fern in there. Okay. And then I'll pop some of my limoneum. So this is the final one. Okay, so I'm going to cut this down into a kind of a shorter posy. So I want to take off all of this kind of stem. So you've got a sort of smaller posy. It's just a little bit shorter. And then that's going to go on top. Now, this part, you can just try your hardest, if you can, to be assertive. Don't be afraid of breaking anything, because this is probably the hardest part of wreath making. It's casting off, it's ending, and making sure that you keep that flow in your last sort of lay down of your posy. Okay, so I'm going to take this nice and tight. Nothing's going to break, and if it does, it doesn't matter. So just hold it really nice and tight in your hand. I'm going to lay that on top, as with all the other posies, on top of the previous posy, and tucking it under the first posy that you put down. So I'm pulling the first posy sort of up a little bit, I'm tucking those stems underneath it, on top of the previous posy that you've done. I'm then grabbing the wreath ring with my hand nice and tight, and I'm going to bind over the stems of my last posy and under the sort of top of my first posy that I put down. Oh, please don't worry about this. This is, you know, you need to be kind of quite assertive with it. You really don't want anything falling out, but you're just simply binding the last posy whilst tucking it underneath the first posy. It's as simple as that. Okay. So when I know that it's nice and secure, I'm then going to lift my wreath up. Okay. I'm then going to, I'm just going to turn it round so you can see. I'm going to take my binding wire and sort of leave myself, you know, about 4 or 5 inches. So I'm just going to cut that. Okay. So I've got a sort of section here. I'm then going to tuck this section under so that it's almost like sewing. Tucking it under the top ring of the copper ring, so the top sort of bar, I guess. It's a bit tricky when it's back to front. And then I'm going to find where that end is and I'm going to pull it. So it's almost like you're sewing, you're sort of casting off if you were sewing. So underneath, if I can. through, find where it's gone, and then pull. Okay, so I do that a couple of times, and then if you've kind of still got a bit of length on your binding wire, trim that down further, and then simply bend it back on itself and just tuck it in, push it in to that moss. And that's how you've finished your wreath. And then now we add in these beautiful bulbs. It's up to you if you want to add in your string now. I think it would be good because often where you cast off is often the sort of top of your wreath. So that's where I'm going to add in my string. So I'm simply going to where I've bound my last posy, I'm going to put that string through, pull it out, so you've got sort of half, like that, and then I'm simply just going to tie it in a knot at the back, and then that is your hanging string. You can double the string if you want to make it more secure. I mean, this is pretty strong twine, so you should be fine on just a sort of single, but if you want to double it, you can. And then if you're hanging it, I would then sort of tie it in a knot, depending on how sort of low down on your door you want it. And then you've got that loop to hang it over a knocker or a hook or a nail. So that's your twine, your hanging twine. Now let's put in our bulbs. Okay, so you've got a pot of blue muscari and a pot of white muscari. Now the blue muscari is taking longer to come out for some reason. I think it's in a cooler sort of area of the studio. So we're going to basically stick some skewers up these bulbs and pop them in a nutshell. So in your kit you will have your skewers, and you quite simply need to sort of break them in half. So I'm going to do this with my secateurs. So you're breaking them in half. So in essence, you've got 2 sections per skewer, because you'll probably have between sort of 13 and 14 bulbs in total to put in your wreath. Okay, so I'm just going to take my bulbs out. If you can, I would give them a drink first. You'll see that I haven't given them a drink, and they're a bit crumbly, but it's best just to give them the longest chance. Just give them a nice drink. So you're just simply going to dust off as much compost as you want to. You don't have to dust any off if you don't want to. And then I'm just going to gently pop the skewer into the bulb. Doesn't damage it, doesn't harm it. It's just an easy way to then be able to pop your bulb into your wreath. Now, really important sort of tip. All of your bulbs need to face the same motion, same direction as all of your posies. So I'm just going to, at an angle, pop that into the moss, and then it just sits beautifully like that. Okay. So I'm going to do them all at the same time. I personally quite like when you can see the roots. I think it adds another kind of dimension and a texture to the wreath. It's completely up to you. I personally would leave them on. They are going to last a bit longer, I think. They're more likely to get those nutrients that they need. But you will be surprised at how long your bulbs will last on your wreath. I mean, you can actually grow bulbs just in water. You don't actually need the compost. So they do really well. Okay, so these are the blue muscari. So I'm going to place these sort of evenly throughout my wreath. So you'll have about 7, I think. Sort of going at a slight angle, so that it always follows that kind of motion that you've done everything else in. Okay, You can also, if you want to, cluster. So if you want just to add a little bit of interest, I'll do it here. I'm just going to cluster 3 of these blue mascari, just to add, you know, draw the eye in, add a sort of different look to part of my wreath. Okay, so those are the blue. Now I'll add in the white. Again, give your bulbs a nice drink. Break them up. This will not kill them. So sort of dust off as much soil as you want to. Keep the roots as they are. In terms of being able to plant your bulbs in your garden after your wreath has finished, you simply take them off, take the skewer out, you let them go completely yellow. I would take off the flower that's gone over, so you can cut that down, just the flower stem. Leave the sort of green shoots to go completely yellow, and so that means that all of those nutrients in those shoots are going into the bulb. Once it's gone yellow, you simply cut all of the sort of yellow shoots off, and then you simply put that in the ground facing up 10 centimetres into the ground, and then forget about it. And then hopefully next spring you'll have lots and lots of beautiful mascari in your garden. So not only can you enjoy it in your wreath for spring, but you'll then hopefully have it again next year. So I'm just putting some skewer into the bulb, into the bottom of it. And then just adding them at an angle into my wreath. So you can just put the white, or whatever one you do second, sort of just in the gaps really. Just being careful of your hand behind the wreath as it sort of comes through. And also making sure you don't have sort of long sections of wood, of the wood skewer, poking out the back of your wreath, because I wouldn't want you to sort of scratch anything. So if you do find that you've got that, let's just take this foliage out, you can trim it at the back of the wreath. So I've got my little cluster here. I might do another cluster over this way to balance it out. And when these flower, my goodness, they will look so beautiful. As they get longer, you can entwine them in all the other foliages. But it really is a sort of abundant wreath. It's so full. It looks beautifully kind of spring-like. And I hope you love it as much as I've loved creating this one. In terms of your care for your wreath, now, I personally don't do this. I put them on my door and then just let it do its thing. You know, in the UK, let's be honest, we have lots of rain. So they just last and last and last and last. So I don't tend to look after my wreath. But if you want it to last even longer, the best thing to do is once you've got it on your door, where's the top? There it is. Once you have it on your door, you can just take, you know, a jug or a bottle of water and just trickle down the back, just sort of, you know, if you had it, just trickle down the back, and all that's going to do is sort of kind of moisten the sphagnum moss, and that's what keeps it nice and fresh. You can also give it a spritz if you want to, with a spritz gun, but that's about it. Just enjoy it, enjoy the bulbs, hopefully enjoy the bulbs next year, and let me know if you have any questions at all about your wreath or the process of making it. I'd love you to tag me if you can, so that I can see them, see how beautiful they look. And that's about it. So that is your spring wreath kit tutorial.